So we come to our next talk, which is the Hours of the Day in the Parisian Hôtel by Charissa Bremer David, who is Curator of Sculpture and Decorative Arts at the J. Paul Getty Museum. Charissa joined the Getty Museum in 1981, but you would hardly believe it when you see her. She received her BA in Art History from the University of California, Santa Barbara in 1980, and an MA in Modern European History from the University of California in Los Angeles in 1987. Her research into the archives of the New York art dealer French & Company was published in Studies in the Decorative Arts by the Bard, earning the Robert C. Smith Award of the Decorative Arts Society in 2003 to 4. In the past 5 years, she's collaborated on several important exhibitions, notably Audrey's Painted Menagerie in 2007, which focused on an 18th century Indian rhinoceros who made the 17-year tour across Europe as an animal celebrity, Taking Shape, Finding Sculpture in the Decorative Arts, co-organized with the Henry Moore Foundation Institute in Leeds, in England, and exploring the interplay between sculpture and decorative arts in 17th and 18th century Europe and Paris, life and luxury in 2011, which brought together a wide and diverse range of works to convey the rich material context of the elite Parisian lifestyle in the mid-18th century. And that is very much the background of what Charissa is going to talk about today. So please join me in welcoming Charissa Bremer David.
Good morning, and thank you for that introduction. And I offer my congratulations to the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, the Legion of Honor, and Martin Chapman, and Maria Sant'Angelo, and all the local and international collaborators who brought the Salon Doré to fruition. So beautiful. Let's see. My assignment today is to contextualize the place and function of this room within its original 18th century house, and to explore the activities that might have taken place there. What role did the Salon Doré, or more precisely the Salon de Compagnie, serve within the residence and household of the Hôtel de la Trémoïlle, which, as you've heard by now, was located at the old number 61, Rue Saint-Dominique, in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, on the left bank of Paris. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the present Salon Doré as an object within the fine arts collections of the Legion of Honor. It's a bit controversial, but I'll take a stand and call it a work of art. As a work of art, its physical presence is quite large enough to enter, and we are fortunate enough to experience its dimensionality and diverse materiality by walking within its space. And contrary to one's normal encounter with a museum object, our sensory perception of this one, its proportions, architectural rhythms, and play of light and reflection upon its mirrors and gilt surfaces, is as extraordinary as it is enveloping. Yet, despite this empirical insight, this insider's perspective, so to say, we must also acknowledge that the room is as removed from its original context as we are from the 18th century, geographically and temporally. And I think this is what Alexandre Gadi was just speaking about. So just as the room is now removed from its origin, so too are my conjectures. How can one mitigate this gap? And I have tried to anchor my observations to contemporary 18th century accounts. But you'll note that the cited sources are sometimes contradictory, and we therefore must allow for literary and artistic license, and for exceptions to and deviations from the standard modes of etiquette and behavior. Speaking generally, the 18th century Parisian Hôtel particulier was a microcosm of urban society, even if access to its interiors was restricted to members of polite society and closely connected family and friends. So, I need to find the pointer. Here we are with the Plan Turgot of Paris in the 1730s. The western tip of the Ile de la Cité with the Cathedral of Notre Dame, the Pont Neuf. And here is the Abbey Church of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and the Faubourg Saint-Germain stretches west all the way to the Invalides here. And here is the old Rue Saint-Dominique. So by this statement that the Hôtel Particulier was also a microcosm of urban society, I mean that although the family in residence was noble by lineage, titled by landed estates, privileged by rank, authority, or office, and wealthy from urban and rural sources of income, the reality was that the family's status depended entirely upon and was supported by servants who lived within the hotel itself, and by those tradesmen and artisans who inhabited much humbler dwellings and rooms nearby in the neighboring community. Hence, my analogy to the household as a microcosm of broader society. In this regard, let us consider one contemporary source, Jean-Joseph Exbilly, who counted in 1765 some 4,773 servants living in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, quarter of Paris, in service to 1,553 noble families. And that averaged out to about 3 or 4 servants per household, though in the larger, more elite dwellings of the quarter, more servants were in attendance. And for any of you who have read Xavier Bonnet's essay in the new publication, he gives names to 42 servants working for the family, the Duc de Trémoilly. And this is extraordinary. They are not anonymous. They are people with names. So when we imagine 18th century life in the Hôtel de la Trémoilly, let us first recall the hierarchy of the entire household. As we'll hear today, there was a litany of occupations involved in designing and creating the Salon de Compagnie within the pre-existing townhouse, and then, thereafter, in the preparation for its use by family members and guests. In this case, those involved included first and foremost Jean Breton, Charles, Duc de Trémoilly and de Tours, who as patron, or perhaps it was his father, commissioned the architect Pierre-Auguste Delapoise to design around 1780 the Salon de Compagnie and its fixed furniture, en suite with the paneling. And I'm showing you on the left an elevation not related to our Salon Doré, but a contemporary design for a different Salon de Compagnie by the architect Chagrin. And on the right, for comparison, I thought we would take a look at the elevation by the San Francisco architectural firm of Andrew Skirman. So there were also the craftsmen who constructed the room, including joiners, carvers, painters, gilders, glaziers, marble workers, and the upholsterer, or the valet de chambre, who furnished it. And once finished and furnished, household staff then choreographed the preparations for its use on special occasions, including opening or closing the windows and curtains, laying the fire and lighting the candles, and arranging the movable or portable tables, chairs, and other furnishings or objects, such as perhaps a harpsichord or harp as required. The title and subject of my talk, The Hours of the Day, were inspired by a chapter in the 1782 volume Tableau de Paris, or Picture of Paris, written by the essayist, satirist, and commentator Louis-Sébastien Mercier, and he expounded upon the quotidian life of the city from the various viewpoints of the diverse inhabitants. And it's due to this overarching perspective. His chapter reveals telling details about the social hierarchy of the city, quarter, and house. No level of society escaped his caustic wit, but his insights were all the more poignant for their ferocity. And I hope you don't mind, but I will read an excerpt of this chapter because nothing better can set the stage of Paris in 1782. And though the city gates and thoroughfares are the main locus of Mercier's portrayal, the comings and goings of the citizens offer us clues as to the variety of people who would have entered a Hôtel Particulier, when and why. And I have chosen some contemporary French paintings and prints to illustrate this reading. And though the translation in English also dates from 1782, the pairings of illustrations are my own, so please don't fault either the artist or the author for these pairings. Excuse me. So the hours of the day, quote, "The hours of the day offer by turns the image of perpetual motion and stagnating tranquility. The scene shifts from one to the other in a constant succession and nearly within the same space of time. At 7 o'clock, all the gardeners who have been to market return to their marshes with empty baskets. One is not troubled then by the rattling of coaches, nor meeting with anyone in the streets but clerks going to their respective offices, with their heads dressed and profusely powdered at this unfashionable time of day. At 9, the streets are crowded with a swarm of barbers and hairdressers holding in one hand their curling irons, and in their other a ready-dressed periwig, their own clothes bepowdered from top to bottom. This is the livery of their profession. At the same time, the coffee house waiters carry breakfast to the inhabitants of the ready-furnished apartments, while our inexperienced centaurs, followed by their footmen, gallop away to the boulevards, to the great terror of the harmless pedestrian, who is often the victim of their bad horsemanship. As the clock strikes 10, a sable cloud of lawyers and other limbs of the law in two dread-inspiring divisions march on towards the Palais and Châtelet, where the judges to sleep, the pleaders to waste their lungs, and the clients to lose the best or win the worst cause, according to the humor in which the judge awakens from his slumber. Nothing to be met with but men dressed in bands and black gowns, laden with bags full of briefs and rejoinders, with plaintiffs and defendants in full cry after them. At 12, money and change brokers hasten in crowds towards the exchange, while the idlers lounge away towards the Palais Royal, to be seen, but much more to be seen. The Faubourg and the street of Saint-Honoré, where dwell the financiers and other men of rank, whose cabinets or studies are at this hour filled with humble suitors come to solicit for pensions or places. At 2 o'clock, those who make their heads and wit pay for the relief of their hungry stomachs, prepare themselves to resort under some of those hospitable roofs where genius in distress is always sure to find a good table. You may see them set off for so commendable an expedition in the best dress they could hire or purchase, walking on tiptoe for fear of splashing their white stockings, and treading as light as possible from one end of Paris to the other, avoiding with the greatest care, though not always with the desired success, the unmerciful approach of carriages, especially the hackney ones, as this is the most busy hour of the day for those uncomfortable vehicles. An hour after, the streets are cleared. At 3 o'clock, it is dinner time. A perfect calm succeeds the rattling storm of coaches and other conveyances, but this tranquility is soon disturbed again. At 5:15, hell is in a manner broke loose. Woe to him who is obliged to walk the streets at this time, as they are blocked up by carriages crossing each other, racing toward the playhouses and public walks. Peace and quiet return again, and at 7 in the evening all is silent, as if the whole city and its inhabitants were laid under the powerful spell of some enchanter. Night falls, and while the stage sets change at the opera, there is a madness of movements as the laborers maneuver through the streets. Carpenters and stonemasons regain the walkways of the faubourgs they inhabit. Plaster from their shoes whitens the pavement, and they are recognized by these traces. When they go to bed, marquises and countesses start their toilette. At 9 o'clock, the charm is destroyed, and the noise of carriages stuns once more your ears and threatens the lives of the foot passengers. It proclaims the return of the idle opulence from a tragedy which they did not feel, or a comedy which they would not understand, because it held up too faithful a mirror to their vices and folly. At 11 o'clock, suppers are nearly ended. The coffee house politicians, indigent scribblers, starving garretteers, shut out from their places of resort, are now on their way to their already furnished apartments, if such a name can be given to a small room, or rather hole on the 5th or 6th story, where their movable furniture consists of a couple of broken chairs, a most wretched bed, and worse bedding. Between 12 and 1, the snoring tradesman is roused by the rattling noise of the coaches of the great who return home. End quote. So, thanks to Mercier, we now have a vivid sense of quotidian life for those who would have been involved in the creation and use of a Parisian Salon de Compagnie of the 1780s, such as that from the Hôtel de la Trémoille. It is clear from his portrayal and the frequent mention of specific hours, Parisians of that era had a shared understanding of time consciousness and timekeeping. And while timekeeping wasn't yet uniform throughout Europe in the 18th century, in France and in Paris, horological true time, as opposed to solar time, was marked in the same familiar manner as we do so now. That is to say, one rotation of the Earth on its axis was measured into 24 units or hours of equal length, divided into diurnal divisions of 12 hours each. That sounds very scientific, but it simply means that morning hours stretched from midnight to noon, and evening hours from noon to midnight. Scientific and mechanical advancements made significant improvement in accurately measuring time, so that urban clocks, such as those positioned in church towers and in government buildings, this is the water pump on the Pont Neuf, domestic clocks and personal watches maintain correct time to within minutes, even seconds per day. The ticking and chiming of these devices were part of the common oral experience, and the social practices and habits observed by Mercier reflected a communal sense of time discipline. Of course, just as today, some lives were more strictly regulated by time than others, but an awareness of time wasn't a condition reserved only for those who had to work for a living. The passage of time readily apparent with the sweep of the second hand on clock dials, and an awareness of mortality raised moral admonitions about using time well, a concern that spanned the breadth of social and financial ranks. Consider, for instance, Monsieur and Madame Faventine, shown here, and pastel portraits of 1768. Pierre Faventine was a minor hereditary noble and a rich tax farmer. He chose to be portrayed as a conscientious man of affairs, seated at his stylish but paper-strewn desk, reading a copy of the Contes Moraux, or Moral Tales, by Jean-François Marmontel. The clock surmounting the desk is disguised as an antique-style urn, and the point of the gilt star points to 10 o'clock on the dial. And It's just above a seated figure who reads, an allegory of study. And she is tended over by a rooster who was an allegory of vigilance and whose cry at dawn was nature's first alarm. Madame Fabentine, for her part, is shown industriously working at her needlework frame at the precise hour of noon, according to the watch pinned by the chatelaine to her robe, just visible in her lap. Inventories of the era reveal that certain domestic rooms, such as the Salon de Compagnie, frequently did contain clocks, and the activities that took place within these rooms were dictated by the conventions of polite society to certain times of day. For instance, the 1790 inventory of the Salon de Compagnie of the Hôtel de la Trémoille did list a clock among the contents of the room, and I'm grateful to Martin Chapman and Xavier Bonnet for kindly sharing the inventory description. At the value of 600 livres, it was one of the more costly objects in the room, and it was described, item, a clock with the maker's name of Les Denous, with an enamel dial marking the hours, minutes, and seconds, as well as the days and months of the year, housed within its case and on a pilastered base, with figures and other ornaments of brass gilded and ormolu. The horloger Pierre Le Denous is recorded as having become a master in the Parisian Clockmakers Guild in 1767, and he was still active when the room was built in 1781. The placement of the timekeeping mechanisms required deliberate consideration so that the dials could be readily seen and read, but also so that the ornamental cases could accentuate and reinforce the architectural rhythm of the decor. Domestic clocks were typically located in visually and spatially prominent axial positions, where their presence helped to structure the interior and attract attention. Their mechanisms were, moreover, indicators of their owner's scientific inclinations and technical savvy, much like our smartphones of today. And the Legion of Honor, as Martin mentioned, has acquired a clock for the reinstalled room, which has been placed on the console table opposite the mantel in just such a prominent and axial position. The dial of the clock rests on a gilt bronze case in its neoclassical style. Its form suggests a shortened architectural pilaster joined by miniature brackets to a rounded arch, whose contour echoes the rounded arches of the room's mirrors. The time mechanism, crafted by the Lepaute brothers, Jean-André and Jean-Baptiste, were the esteemed horloger du roi, and it measures the hours, minutes, and seconds, and it strikes on the hour and half hour. Martin, is it striking?
Yep, it does.
So maybe we can catch the strikes. The maker's signature is enameled on the face of the dial, while two internal springs bear the date 1774, and that's the date the springs were made, so they may predate the assembly of the clock. Among the billowing clouds above the arch, the two finial figures of the twin putti and the celestial sphere between them represent the science of astronomy, and it is a fitting allegory for a clock, as the observation of celestial movements was then fundamental to the determination of both natural and true time, the seasons, and longitude on Earth. And this clock follows a model first conceived for the fashionable country retreat, Bagatelle, as Martin told us, for the Comte d'Artois, who was the brother of Louis XVI, and himself the future King Charles X. And the bronzier Etienne Martincourt was responsible for the finial figures on that first clock. And for comparison, the Comte d'Artois' clock cost 5,000 livres, more than 8 times the value of the de la Trémoille clock. And as a point of reference, a skilled gilder earned between 400 and 750 livres per year before the Revolution. In addition to horological true time, natural time, or more properly, solar time, and thereby a sense of the seasons, was also evident in the Salon de Compagnie, since the room usually featured tall windows, often with views to the garden side of the townhouse. The passing of the seasons would have been readily apparent, especially during the time of year when the family was in residence in town, customarily from November to May, and corresponding with the changes of seasons that went from late fall to winter to spring. Lighting, whether from natural ambient light or from firelight, played a quintessential role in the experience of these, I was going to say pearl, white, and gold, but now I have to say gray and white rooms. So, what happened in a salon de compagnie? As the French term indicates, it was the formal room where company or guests of mixed gender were received and entertained. The chief activity was conversation. But according to the occasion, the room could also be a setting for a musical recital, a theatrical reading, a session of card playing and gaming, or even a ball. Contemporary novels describe these sorts of social gatherings and the typical times at which they occurred. For example, the infamous libertine novel Les Liaisons Dangereuses, published in 1782 by Pierre Chaudelot de Leclos, and brought vividly to the big screen in that 1988 film starring Glenn Close, instructed the reader in these matters as the character of Mademoiselle Cécile Volanges, the 15-year-old fresh-faced ingenue, newly arrived from the convent, learns to navigate adult society in Paris. Thus, we too learn that in polite society, dinner time was around midday. Outdoor walks, promenades, and drives typically occurred in the afternoon. During these hours, illumination in the Salon de Compagnie depended upon ambient light, which grew darker towards evening. Women of rank dressed at 6 p.m. for the evening's activities. Visits with intimate friends occurred around 7 p.m. before the more structured, formal visiting hour of 8 p.m. Evening concerts took place from 8 to 10 before supper. Supper was usually eaten around 10 p.m. Cards and gaming followed around 11 p.m. And bedtime at around 1 a.m. was rather early, and private encounters could continue even later, up until 3 a.m. Access to the Salon de Compagnie was governed by strict rules of sociability and by the network of family connections, friends, and introductions. The host or hostess paid dues to the convention of hospitality, inviting guests and combining groups of different acquaintances together so that discourse was lively and engaging, but ideally respectful of etiquette, and by that we mean noble manners, politesse, the art of pleasing one's company, and bienséance, the art of behaving according to one's station, being self-aware and exercising self-control. Men and women met and exchanged ideas through accepted modes of conversation that temporarily bridged differences within the assembly, differences of lineage, rank, station, and wealth. To accommodate these gatherings, the Salon de Compagnie was fitted with a plethora of seat furniture in numbers that surprise us today. And I think this will be a recurring theme through today's talk, so I'll just quickly say that the Salon de Compagnie of the Hôtel de la Trémoille had 29 chairs in 1790, and this quantity is in keeping with other noble households of the period in that quarter. And for instance, the Salon de Compagnie in the nearby Hôtel Orsay on the route of Varennes had 21 pieces of seat furniture in 1774. And the paneling from that room is now installed in the Cochrane Gallery in Washington, D.C. Some of these pieces of seat furniture, those around the perimeter of the room, corresponded with the architectural rhythm of the paneling and they were not moved or repositioned even during social gatherings. So once again, you see these very same floor plans. And those along the perimeter of the room were distinguished not only by their frames, designed in harmony with the paneling, but also by their shared upholstery fabric. And they were identified in contemporary inventories as mobilier d'architecture or sièges moblants, stationary chairs. The other chairs, such as those arranged in a horseshoe fashion in the middle of the rooms of these plans, were intended to be carried about and positioned as the occasion demanded. So all of that you already know. You are now expert. The upholstery coverings could be more colorful or of a more complex pattern on these chairs, and they were known as mobilier de usage or sièges courants, running chairs. So although this is a recurring theme, I bring it up because it's useful to note the quantity and type of chairs documented in the inventories of the Salon de Compagnie, because they give witness to the way rank was observed, even if guests of different backgrounds might converse over a shared topic. Normally, the host or hostess would take the seat at the top of the horseshoe near the hearth. So in these plans, hearth here and here. And guests of senior age or rank would sit to either side of the host or hostess. Others would occupy the smaller, farther flung side chairs or a stand according to their social stations amongst the assembly. The Comtesse de Genlis recounted in her 1818 Dictionnaire des étiquettes de la cour how during the Ancien Régime, rank was observed when a princess was present during an assembly that included other women of title. Quote, "Here is the etiquette observed in the house of princes. There were in the salons a quantity of chairs, deeply upholstered with fabrics and with broad seat backs, very comfortable. One did not sit on the side chairs and not on the sofas and the armchairs. One didn't sit except on the side chairs and not on the sofas and the armchairs, which were for furnishing and arranged around the paneling where they remained, unless a woman of title was presented, who on that day only was given an armchair. The only chair the princess was to take was the one near the fireplace, and the princess had the courtesy to not take the armchair unless other titled women were present. Every other day she took a side chair, as did all the other ladies." So I'll conclude this review on the function of the private domestic Salon de Compagnie by touching upon its role in theory and in practice as a location for informed discourse. The word for the domestic room, salon, was also the name for an activity that occurred within that space, and that activity being an assembly of notables gathered together on a regular basis by a host or hostess to discuss artistic, literary, scientific, or philosophical matters. In semantic terms, I'm going to paraphrase Katie Scott, our next speaker after lunch, and say that the word itself, salon, came to represent a co-mingling of spatial and social practices. Now, there's a vast literature concerning the long history of the salon as a social gathering and its many manifestations. But honing in on the 18th century Paris, scholars have considered a myriad of facts concerning the salon and disputed the meaning about the composition of the various participants, the topics of discussion, the proprieties regulating discussion or debate, the role of female hostesses, whether the sociability of the salon reflected a more courtly elitist modality or a more democratic form that included intellectuals from among the Republic of Letters, the philosophes, and the encyclopédistes. And moreover, whether the salon was truly a transformative force in shaping mentalities. The personality and financial resources of the host or hostess determined the nature of the assemblies and the topics of conversation. Depending on his or her character and preferences, the circle could be literary, cultural, intellectual, political, elegant, or worldly. Some salons and salonières, such as Madame Geoffrin, who we meet here in her lilac dress and black cap, were noted for promoting artists, and she did. And she fostered talent by way of introducing painters to prospective patrons and by bestowing gifts upon her protégé. For more than 25 years, from 1750 to 77, her salons convened twice weekly, beginning at 1 p.m. with dinner, on Mondays for artists, and on Wednesdays for men of letters. And her famous salon may well have been the inspiration for Mercier's quip in the Tableau de Paris about those geniuses in distress who sought out hospitable houses with generous tables. Though I must say that Madame Geoffrin was not the most wealthy of salonières. And these geniuses were those wits who had to sing for their supper, so to speak. But the salon in substance was more than simply a formal chat room. In the tradition of the ancient Roman lyric poet Horace, the sociability of the salon was meant to amuse and educate the mix of participants. And as the modes of conversation ranged from impersonal to rhetorical, and from courteous to impassioned, the gatherings were not just opportunities for dialogue, but schools for polite manners, moral discernment, and aesthetic taste. And it's worth noting a few facts salient to today's focus as they inform our understanding of the intellectual and social life of the quarter around the Hôtel de la Trémoïlle and what took place in the neighboring salons. According to a police report of 1775, 12 of the 28 most prestigious salons that convened on a regular basis in that year were held in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, including those hosted by three famous female salonières, the Marquise d'Effin, the Duchesse de Vallières, and Jean-Julie Eleanor de l'Espinasse, who is number 2 on this legend. The long-lived Marquise d'Effin was close friends with the literary giant Voltaire, who is represented as bust number 12. The encyclopedist Jean-Laurent d'Alembert, number 6. And there is his confrère, Denis Diderot, number 7. And then someone who's not on this legend, and it was not included in this picture, the English politician Horace Walpole. So Madame d'Effin, the Marquise, de D'Effin, lived and held her salon for 17 years near the Hôtel de la Trémoïlle, just further along on the Rue Saint-Dominique, in apartments with a private entrance that were part of the convent of Saint-Joseph. Following a quarrel with her younger friend, lodger, and assistant, the Mademoiselle L'Espinasse, here, she broke away and established her own salon around the corner on the Rue de Bellechasse that d'Alembert and the economist Turgot, who is number 8 on this legend, and she had a literary clique attend her salon. And for those of you who walk the streets of the Faubourg Saint-Germain, recognize the plan Paris par arrondissement, the map of Paris, modern day. To situate us, here is the Church of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the Musée d'Orsay, the Quai d'Orsay. Here is the old Rue Saint-Dominique, which has been cut short by the extension of the Boulevard Saint-Germain. So I believe that the old Hôtel de la Trémoïlle would have been about here, right? Yes? And so the Rue Saint-Dominique was also the street on which Madame d'Effin had her salon. Here is the intersecting Rue Bellechasse, where Madame Lespinasse held hers. Here is the famous Rue de Varennes, and off map over here is the famous Hôtel d'Orsay and the townhouse that is now the Musée Rodin. So that situates you there. The Paris journals of Horace Walpole recorded how he supped almost daily with both the Marquise de Deffin and the Duchesse de la Vallière through the August of 1775. And from 1788, another English art connoisseur, William Beckford, resided in the Hôtel d'Orsay on the Rue de Varennes. So the Hôtel de la Trémoïlle had this constellation of intellectuals and international visitors right there in the neighborhood. And I can't leave off the topic of the Salon without mentioning the Salon, the most famous gathering in 18th century Paris that was truly public. And I am speaking of the biannual contemporary art exhibit hosted by the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture that was held in a very large gallery in the Palais de Louvre, in the so-called Salon, which I've put here in a blue and white star, the Bourbon colors, between the Galerie d'Apollon and the Grande Galerie of the Louvre along the embankment of the Seine. That exhibition, known simply as the Salon, took place on odd number years, starting every occurrence on August 25th and extending for days, 2 weeks. The show included dozens and dozens of contemporary works of painting, sculpture, and engraving, densely arranged in an aesthetically pleasing but somewhat random order, covering the gallery walls from top to bottom as seen in this view of the Salon of 1787 by Martini. Admission was free, so the Salon attracted sizable crowds from all ranks of society. In 1781, our year, for instance, some 35,000 visitors came through, and we might just imagine, take a leap of imagination, the members of the de la Trémoïlle family among them. And then more than 17,000 printed booklets were sold that year, identifying the works of art with their makers. And one can safely assume that visitors came as much to see the art as the crowds in attendance, according to the age-old need to see and to be seen. No one wishing to stay abreast of the city's cultural events would miss the Salon, nor, if they could obtain the banned newsletter titled The Correspondance Littéraire, would they neglect to read Denis Diderot's critical review of each Salon, which he wrote from 1759 to 81. So really, now I have strayed off topic, but I hope these observations have fleshed out the context for our Salon Doré, the Salon de Compagnie from the Hôtel de la Trémoïlle, which was brought back to life this week with due consideration for its 18th century appearance and origin. Thank you.